Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Moving from FUDs to Facts, the language of effective risk management in cybersecurity. I'm Katie Watson, and I'll be your host today representing Secon. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. Secon is a cybersecurity partner committed to helping empower organizations take control of their security challenges with confidence. And today's session is all about breaking away from fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and embracing clear, fact-based risk management strategies. We're really lucky today to be joined by Javvad Malik, lead security awareness advocate at KnowBe4. So if you work in cybersecurity, you might have come across Javad's work. He is a Guinness World Record holder, a multi-award winning security expert, an author, and a speaker who brings a refreshing no-nonsense approach to security awareness. So he's here today to help us rethink how we communicate cyber risk, whether it's to the boardroom or in the break room. Just before we begin, a little bit of housekeeping. So the session will run for approximately 45 minutes, and we will have a Q&A at the end. So with questions, please drop them in the Q&A box. We'll try to tackle as many as possible. And if there are any we don't get to, I'll make sure to reach out to you afterwards to get you an answer. The session is being recorded and we will share the recording with you afterwards. And we do appreciate any feedback you have. So if you found something particularly interesting or you want to know more, please do get in touch. So with all of that said, grab a coffee, relax, settle in, and I'm going to hand it over to Javvad to take us through how we move from FUDs to facts. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Katie, for that introduction. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Let me get my screen up, and then hopefully that's visible to all. Give me a nod, Katie, if that's coming through.
Yep, that's coming through.
Perfect. Okay. So yes, let's jump straight into it. We, as a cybersecurity industry, have been using some form of fear, uncertainty, and doubt for many, many years. And while I think if you've been in the industry as for a couple of decades or so, like I have, you've probably seen the effectiveness of FUD go down because we just keep crying wolf, repeating the same thing. And so with the effectiveness going down, there's less likely people are going to listen to you, take you seriously, give you budget and all that kind of good stuff. So, we end up in the situation of the boy that cried wolf. We kind of reduce the credibility of the security teams. We also have real difficulty in prioritizing what are the real threats. It's a bit like I'm reminded because I've got kids who love to watch cartoons and stuff, and in The Incredibles, there's a line in that they say, like, if everyone's super, then no one is. And I think that applies to risk. If everything is a major risk, then nothing is. Everything is treated like with equal priority or disdain or what have you. And I think a lot of this comes down to how sometimes risk is communicated. So this is an old example, but you'll see that this is a pattern that has repeated itself many times over the years or even the months that you've probably been observing within the industry that you're working in. So there's a new vulnerability. It's very serious. This could be Heartbleed, but you could replace Heartbleed with anything. And so the question that comes back is, what is the impact? And then it's like, well, anything that uses SSL is potentially exposed. And then it's like, well, what uses open SSL? Everything. Are we hacked? Well, it's not that simple. And then finally, it's like, well, why is this then more serious than the last one that you told me about a few weeks ago? And this is kind of like this endless cycle that I think, even if you're not trying to peddle FUD, when you see people not explaining the criticality well enough, or worse still, when an exec reads about a new vulnerability in their favorite publication and they come down the line and say, like, well, what is this new vulnerability? And we don't communicate that back up the chain as well as we should, that causes issues. So I always say that a risk statement, whenever anyone asks me, like, they want to get into security and what's one of the best skills they should learn, And I say that, well, if you're good at telling a story or framing things into way of a story, you can go really far. Because when you think about it, a risk statement or a report or findings after you've done a pen test or or an audit or a gap analysis or anything, you're really trying to tell a story and you're trying to sell a story with some actions or some key learning points within it. And if you can do that, I think you can be really, really successful in this as a career, regardless of whether you're in a highly technical role or whether you're in a management role or a governance role or an audit role, whatever it might be. So journalists use this kind of inverted pyramid approach to when they're writing a story. So you put the most important news at the top, then you put in some important details, and then the lesser details further on. So once you actually spot this, you start seeing this everywhere that there's a good author to an article. So, for example, you pick up a newspaper and you see England beats Germany 5-0 in football. Now, if you stop reading there, you've pretty much got the most important bit of information. There was a football match between England and Germany, and England thrashed them 5-0. Wishful thinking, maybe, but other things have happened. But then what happens is you start reading the article, and it gives you more details, like 3 goals were scored in first half, 2 goals were in the second half, 1 was a penalty. Then it tells you who scored the goals. Then it tells you the times of the goals. Then it tells you any cards that were given out, the size of the audience. And so the details get smaller and smaller, but you could stop reading at any given point in time and you still got the gist of the story. You're not losing anything by not reading it. And when you think about it, when you read a risk statement, and I encourage you to go back and read some any risk in your on your systems. What does it look like? Does it look like you can read the heading and you can get the gist of it all, or is it like, does the heading read something like epic clash between England and Germany leaves fans stunned? All of it might be correct, but it doesn't actually tell you what game they were playing or what the score was or who won. So we need to start there and work our way down. And this is why, when we talk about communicating up the chain, especially to the board or something, start with the headlines and value their time. So if we take this and we take our Heartbleed example and we want to improve it, we can do something like this. We can start with the headline. There's a vulnerability. This is what it's called. It exists here, and it's used by millions of servers. So you can read that, and that gives you really good context about the whole vulnerability. Then you can go into the detail about what this means to your organization. And then you contextualize this to say, like, what this actually means in terms of impact. And then you can have a call to action that, I'm going to audit the systems. Once I have a number, please call a meeting and we can discuss the findings. So now you've taken control of the narrative. It's not this, what's this, why is that happening? You've now framed it in a way that you're providing all the information and you're giving clear call to action. And this way, even if it is a super serious incident that affects 80% of your organization, you're not going into this whole FUD selling, but it's contextualized and people understand why. The other thing is, when we're risk focused, we can become more data driven. And I just realized I gave away this slide earlier, but we'll go. I'll say anyway. When everyone's super, no one will be. So how do we take more a data-driven approach to risk management? I think that becomes a very important thing, because again, when you look at organizations, we've been collecting data, lots of data, for a very long time. We have like log management tools, we have SIMs, we have data lakes, we have all sorts of data there, which we can be using more proactively, as opposed to after the fact going through and saying, this is what all the data said, this is all the logging and what have you. So I'll say, like, I like this example of, like, imagine there's an invading army. And one side is having great impact by going down the right flank. And then you respond by building up defenses on your left flank. And then say, well, we've spent all this money on defenses. Why hasn't it worked? And if you think about it, this is kind of like happens quite a lot in cybersecurity, where either a lot of investment is a knee-jerk reaction to a very specific event that may not even occur again, or we don't go deep enough into the root cause or understand why it's happening, and we try to patch things up at a surface level. Why is it like this? I think there's just too much information out there. There's new threats all the time. There's media and vendors like me who have their own narratives, I suppose. Compliance is a big driver because people, you know what it's like, especially if you're in a regulated environment, you want to satisfy the auditor. And I heard a really good quote by at an event I was at, and it said like if compliance, it provides great security if your only threat actor is the auditor. So I quite like that because, like, yeah, you get your auditor off your back, but will you get all your threats off your back? There are many projects, competing issues, budgeting, inefficient IT, but what that leads to is something that, like this, you've got like a basket of risks that you go with. There's no prioritization, and so you say, well, let's enable all the controls in the same way. So you've got a certain pot of money to spread out, and so you just spread it out equally amongst all these equal risks, which aren't actually equal. So I'd say like we should go back down a level and try to examine the root cause of these attacks. And so, if you identify the root cause and stop that from occurring, you can actually become far more effective. And literally, I think there's 10, 12, 15 root causes that everything boils down to. These are probably most of them. You might be able to think of a couple of others, but social engineering, some bugs, um, you know, human error, eavesdropping, these kinds of things, insiders, third party. These are kind of like your root causes. And I'd suggest like if you go through your incident logs over the last couple of years and look at what the root cause of each of your incidents was, you'll probably be able to come up with a handful of root causes that actually cause the majority of your incidents. And if you then focus on those, you'll get a far better return on investment and your risk will come down overall a lot more. So looking externally at risks, we can say, so this might not be indicative of your organization because I'd say the data you have internally is the best source of data. But if you look at externally at trends and what have you, social engineering is the biggest risk. Like nearly every threat intel report you see, will mention some sort of social engineering. There was a phishing an email or attachment there, or they phoned someone up. Number two is unpatched software. And then number three is kind of like stolen credentials or bypassing, weak credentials or brute forcing, that kind of stuff. And then everything else is actually a long tail of smaller threats, typically. And this actually, and this is why I think it's such an important exercise to go through, because then it gives you the data that you can then use to actually understand what your biggest risks are. Because we as humans are really poor at risk evaluation. And some of the examples are like kind of like, there's a lot of people tend to be afraid of flying, whereas, the odds of actually getting into an accident on the drive to the airport are far greater than actually, something happening on the airplane. But we're human, and we sometimes don't care what the data says. But this is where, like, if we can divorce ourselves from that emotion in the work context, we can actually make far more better informed decisions. Getting eaten by a shark, one in 3.7 million. And actually, I found this really interesting, where like mosquitoes actually kill far more people, probably in a day, than sharks have caused in the last 100 years. So I think it's a good nudge towards having a better sort of data-driven defense cycle that we can go through. So if we start at the top, I think it's about collecting the information you have internally. I think that is the key. Collect that data and then use that to rank your risks, then create your plans, use that to define your metrics, find that and deploy your root cause defenses. So this is where your purchasing should be informed from. It shouldn't be like you go to InfoSec or some other big conference and someone's telling you, hey, API security is the biggest, or whatever security is the biggest threat out there. It might be a threat. It might not be a threat to you at all. So use this internal data, and then we review and improve. It's like the and do check act. Everything is cyclical in cybersecurity because nothing remains static. So by doing that, I think we can really come up with a good way forward. So how do we create long-lasting change? And I add this because when you look at different reports, they say like the average tenure of a CISO is what, 24 months or something, 18 to 24 months, 36 months. It's not a very long time. And the problem with that is that a lot of these programs of work take a period of time to actually implement correctly. So what we want to do is say like, well, even if I'm not here in 2 years' time, how do I create a culture where we can where it can outlive or not live, but outlast within the organization the CISO, so the strategy remains intact. And one of that, culture is one of those things that you need people on board to actually make that happen. So people is a big topic that a lot of organizations talk about, and they're like, well, how do we get people to make the right decisions? And that's a really good question. I think we should all be trying to get people to make better risk decisions. But the implementation is normally poor. So we say like, okay, this is like a karate dojo, a bit like Cobra Kai. We just train them, and then we train them again, and we yell at them for not learning. And I think that the problem with this approach is that because a lot of security people tend to come from a somewhat technical background, that's probably changing a bit now, but historically, we try to think as trainers, that everyone needs to be trained up to a certain level and kind of like become security experts. And that's really, I don't believe that to be true at all. I don't think we need to make our colleagues or our senior execs security experts. We just need them to understand and adopt the right secure behaviors. And to do that, I think we need to think more like marketers and less like trainers. And what does marketing do? Going back to what I was saying earlier about storytelling, it's really about telling a story, getting people engaged, and having the little call outs there for what actions to take. So this is something we've seen here at KnowBe4. We've got a series, a training series or awareness series called The Inside Man. And it's like a Netflix show. It's basically like 6-minute, 10-minute episodes, several episodes per season. There's 6 seasons out at the moment, with 7th one in filming. And this really works because what we found is that people email us occasionally, frequently, and they say, I was midway through season 3 and I've now left the company I was in, but I'm really desperate to know what happens at the end of the season. So please, can you give me access to the training? And this is absolutely amazing because I've never worked at a company and left and felt the need to say, I was partway through my anti-money laundering training. Please, can I get access to it? Or please, can I read the policy on acceptable computer use again? That doesn't happen. And if it was just training, no one would get in touch. But because there's a story attached to it, there's a connection that people feel to it. That's what makes it more positive. But storytelling doesn't. Sometimes it takes more time, and you need to build it out over a period and get people invested. It's a bit like watching a new TV show. It takes you a few episodes actually to get into it. So you're actually investing a bit of time because you want to know who the characters are, what the plot is, what everything is. And sometimes you give up until all your friends are telling you, "Oh, this is a great show. You need to watch Breaking Bad. It's just the best." And you're like, I started watching it. It seemed a bit, and then you start watching it again. You give it another go, and then sometimes you really get into it. But sometimes that's not enough. And this is where I think nudges really come in. So we talk a lot about behavioral nudges. And what's a nudge? It's like it like fills the gap between what we intend to do and what we actually end up doing. So, I wake up in the morning and I'm thinking, well, I go to sleep at night thinking I'm going to wake up in the morning and go for a run. That's my intention. But when I wake up in the morning, I kind of like feel a bit lazy. I don't want to do it. It's a bit cold, so I don't. So what does a nudge do? It sort of like encourages me in that moment to do the right thing. So what do? If I put my trainers and my running kit right next to the bed, and I wake up and I see it there all prepped, then I sort of like I can put it on and I remove the friction. And so within security, we need to think about where are we removing friction and where are we adding friction. And it's kind of like a lot of the things that James Clear talks about in his book Atomic Habits is that how do you architect your life or how do you architect your systems to make it easier for people to make the right choice? So a nudge should be technically, it should be easy, attractive, social, and timely. So if putting my running kit next to my bed, it's easy. I don't know how to make it more attractive, but I could make it social. I could invite a friend. I say, like, I'll meet you in the park at, in the morning and we can go for a run. So then it becomes social. And as long as as long as it's timely, then we can do it. And we see nudges in everyday life all the time. So putting your recycle bin right next to your landfill bin, really good idea because then you're going to throw away the rubbish anyway. It takes no effort to really split it out and just throw the recycling there and there. So you're not really mandating or forcing people to do something. You're just making it easily accessible. Something like this, save paper. So, the more paper you come out, the darker the continent goes. One of my favorite nudges I saw online, so I don't know if it's true, but I like to believe it's true, is a designated smoking area that is shaped like a coffin. So, it's like you're free to smoke. Here's your designated area. It just looks like a coffin. There are some cheeky nudges like a banana that's single. So pick me, I'm single. It's it puts a smile on your face, and you might say, okay, I'll have that with my lunch. Uh, Writing down how many calories are burnt by taking the stairs, another example of a nudge. In technology, how can we implement this? Something like a password meter is a really good nudge. So, you start off typing out your password and it goes from red, it's not great. And the more you type it, the stronger your password gets, the greener it gets until it's like a check mark or a smiley face at the end. And this has been proven to encourage people to choose stronger passwords. Even though you might not be technically enforcing it, they can still choose a not great password. But people really want that feedback really helps them. And the advantage also of this is that you're not writing a great block of text underneath saying your password must be this many characters long, it must be this, it must be that. This becomes very intuitive. That's the word I was looking for. It becomes very intuitive. And this is where we can get smarter with our nudges because with technology, everything we can adapt everything. So we can actually make our nudges relevant, personalized, and adaptive, in addition to easy, attractive, social, and timely. So imagine if you received an email and it said, well, there are some signs of phishing, and it has a red banner across it. So it's not blocking it because it's not entirely sure. So it's not like, oh, I was expecting an email and ITF slowed me down. So you're reducing the friction, but then what are you doing? You're adding this element of information to it, saying, look, okay, it's a spoof domain, or the domain name doesn't match who it is. This was your CEO has a company email address. This is a Gmail email address. There's a sense of urgency. All these things. So what you're doing, you're actually forcing people to slow down and moving them from quick reactive thinking to something that's a bit more important. And again, this goes back to if we start labeling every email with like, "Are you sure about this?" we develop blindness to it after a while. We stop paying attention. But if we're very selective with it, if we go through some process and ensure that this is it, then people can take time out to slow down and say, okay, maybe I need to verify this. So something like this can become a really powerful tool in your arsenal. So going back to gathering your internal threat intelligence, you can do the same thing, not just for your technical risks, but for your people risks as well. So you can gather intelligence from what people do, not just on email, but what are they doing on the network, what are they doing on the endpoint, and all these sorts of things. And you can pull it all together, and then you can build up a risk profile of everyone within the organization. So next time you say, phishing's a really big problem, we need to address the human element, you've got far more better data that gives you far more useful information so that well, actually, phishing's only a problem if you work in HR or marketing because they're far more externally focused. So let's not subject the entire organization to these phishing training. Let's only target these people with these templates that are relevant to them. And by doing that, you can actually take that again. That is a data-driven approach. It takes into consideration all your risks, and so you're going to get far better return on your efforts. I think when we tie all of this together, we get to a point where we start influencing the overall security culture of an organization. And this is kind of like the broad definition, the ideas, customers, and social behaviors of an organization that influence its security. It's a bit like, I suppose, I like the driving analogy. You're driving here, everyone drives in a certain way. We follow a set of rules, what have you. You go to other countries and they have different social norms. So some places they honk a lot on their horn, and it's just kind of a way of saying, I'm coming through out of the way, important person, what have you. Whereas over here, it's seen as a aggressive gesture, like you're in the wrong. How dare you? You should go home and rethink your life choices. That's kind of like what a honk means over here. So similarly, like we need to look at what are the social behaviors of an organization that influence its security. Another definition I really like is you get the culture you ignore. And sometimes we focus on all the things that are causing us issues. It's a bit like the squeaky wheel gets the oil. But sometimes, so if I go into the office and I'm not wearing my badge and nothing inconveniences me, I can still go through all the doors and none of my colleagues ask me, where's your badge? I have no incentive to wear my badge. So I'm going to stop wearing my badge. And what's going to happen is then colleagues that sit closest to me are going to be influenced by that. And what are they going to do? They're going to stop wearing their badges as well. And eventually, over a period of time, maybe 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, I'm going to go into the office and hardly anyone's wearing a badge. And I'm also not going to know who's actually an employee here, who's a contractor, who's a visitor, or who's someone that's just randomly walked off the street. So things you ignore actually add up as well. Conversely, if you adopt a good behavior and you say I start locking my machine every time I walk away from it, whether I'm going to the printer, whether I'm going to go make a cup of coffee, whether I'm just going to go talk to someone, people closest to me are going to say, oh, that's really easy thing to do. I'm going to start locking my machine as well. And eventually, when someone new joins the organization, they will witness that everyone locks their machine when they walk away, so they don't need to be asked, please lock your machine. There doesn't need to be a specific training to say lock your machine. The culture is such that it enforces them or encourages them to lock their machine when they walk away from it. So all of these things come together, and a lot of this comes down to not about how well you can enforce something, but also about the relationship people feel they have with the security team. Now, if the security team is seen as approachable, as reliable, as dependable, as friendly, people are more likely to take their advice and implement it in a way that's desired, as opposed to just like, oh, that's the Department of No, they're always saying no to us. Other examples we can use to see like how culture can be changed is like if we look at something like Martin Luther King Jr., he changed a society's culture, how they think about segregation and treatment of one another. And what did he say? He said, I have a dream, but he did not say, I have a 7-point strategy, because that would have been really weird. He was, I have a 7-point strategy, and by Q3 next year, we're going to reduce racism and segregation by 37.4%, put that on an OKR, and off we go. Because I think that when we talk about culture change, when we talk about changing how people's perspectives are to security and risk, it's not something that happens with a 7-point strategy. It's something that happens through a campaign of, I want to say, in a positive influence campaign, where you are where you're gaining the trust of your stakeholders and your colleagues. You're using data, you're using risk information, but you're presenting it in a story format to get people on board. I think some of the tips I've seen that have worked really well is if you create a champions network across the organization, that can be really useful. And some of your champions can be execs as well, so that when you do get into that board meeting, you've already got allies and people that are championing your cause. If you get people to share stories from the top, that can really help align priorities and goals. And I think consistency is far more important than the intensity. If I go back to my running example, which I clearly don't do, but I like to use it as an example to give the impression that I'm into fitness. And that is that if I run 10 miles today, but then don't run for the next of the month, versus I run half a mile a day, I think I'll be better off running half a mile a day because it's consistent and I'm doing it over a long period of time, and that'll probably make me healthier. We can design the architecture in a way that makes it easier for people to make the right choice. And also, I think we can't sit in an ivory tower, even when we have the data, and just push mandate security controls down, because sometimes there's a valid reason why something won't work. In that regard, we need to have those open conversations with our stakeholders, with our colleagues across the organization. Say, okay, why do you think this is not? We want MFA. MFA is a vital control. Yes, but why isn't it going to work? There might be some reasons. Okay, and then you can work around some alternatives, as opposed to continually banging your head against the brick wall and saying, no, we need to push this out. We need to push this out. So takeaways from here, I'd say like, we need to reduce our reliance on FUD, absolutely. We need to be clear in how we present information. And if we can craft it into some sort of story or follow that kind of like inverted pyramid principle, then that will make it a lot better. Let's identify the root cause. Let's go after root causes. That is what will give us the biggest bang for our buck. Let's focus only when we talk about people, we need to focus only on a few shifts in behavior at a time. Again, use your data to find out what your top behavior risks and only focus on them. As people, we can only process so many changes at any one given point in time. So if we try to say like, here are 10 behaviors you need to change, you're gonna fail. So if your New Year resolutions were like more than 6, by now we're at the end of January, you probably failed. But if you only picked 1 or 2 resolutions, you're probably more likely to be on track. Build for people, personalize and adapt your approach, and let's work to building cultures that are secure and that will outlast us in the organization. So with that, thank you so much for your time and attention, and I will be happy to take any questions or comments or conversation.
Thank you so much, Javvad. That was really interesting, and I loved the Incredibles and the Cobra Kai reference. So I hope everyone enjoyed that. If you do have any questions, please put them in the chat. Alternatively, you can email me afterwards at katie.watson@seconcyber.com. And whilst some of you may be thinking of questions, I did have a few, Javvad, and I think one of the things that really resonated when I was talking to people about this webinar is this use of jargon in cybersecurity. And also, anyone in the audience, if you have any answers to this, what are some really kind of overused jargon phrases now that you would actually recommend we kind of steer clear of?
Oh, so there's a lot of jargon out there, isn't there? There's when you pick up, and I find this interesting when you speak to a friend or a family member that's not a security professional, and if you try to read out something from like a technical thing, you can see them. Yeah, I think that's where it really hits home that, oh, this is an internal term. Means nothing to them. This has got no context whatsoever. And sometimes we uh, are very specific in the terminology we use. And specificity is useful when we're internally discussing amongst ourselves because we need to be sure, are we talking about a server? Are we talking about a patch? Are we talking about an upgrade? Are we talking about whatever? But when we converse outside of our internal bubble, we need to really try to simplify it and explain it in a way that people can get the gist of it. And I think all too often we get fixated on being right or using the right terminology. And my point to them is always like, do you want to be right or do you want to be helpful? And I think we should look to be helpful as opposed to right. So internally, we know there's a difference between doing an audit versus doing a pen test, which is slightly different from a red teaming exercise. But I think externally speaking, we're just doing an assurance check. Um, so I think it's things like that we can just look at and say, like, it's not, I mean, people don't care whether we found out there was a vulnerability in a certain software because someone broke into the building and with night vision goggles and escaped everything, or whether they done it sitting at a laptop across the world, or whether our auditor found it. The thing is that we just found a bug and it needs to be fixed. So I think like the more we can simplify and be in that process where we can explain it to someone that doesn't work in security, the better off we'll be.
That's a really good answer, and it's a really helpful way to think about things. Another question that comes to mind is, cyber security is quite scary when you don't really, you may not understand it, or you see in the news, you see breaches, and you think about your own organization. And I can imagine without knowledge as well behind why things happen, you could be even more scared. How can, heads of ITs, CISOs, and those in management positions kind of balance the need for transparency about cyber risk, but also the need to, maintain trust and credibility and not really just scare people?
Yeah, so that's always a challenge because what people what people ask isn't always what they need. And I'll say that, so like say like we patched the system and because of that our website went down and then it took us 3 hours to recover. So now they're going to be like, why did you patch it? And we'll say like, because there was a vulnerability. How important was that vulnerability? Well, it was very important, that vulnerability. So we go through that whole process again. They're not really asking why did you patch it. What the real question is like, why was my website down for 3 hours and I lost business? That's their real question. So we need to think about what is it that people really ask, or what is it that they really want to know, what's important to them, and then reframe our answer in that regard. So we can say, look, okay, you don't want systems to go down, we don't want systems to go down, but we want them to be secure. How can we manage a system that we can be more effective in this, or how can we have a scheduled downtime window once every so often, or how can we manage that? So I think a lot of it is just really understanding what is it that's important, and this is why especially if you work for a public company, I'd say join the shareholders call if you can, or read the reports, the shareholders reports. That'll actually give you a really good understanding as to what your execs have committed to and why they're doing certain things. And then you can say that here's how what I'm doing is supporting that objective. Oftentimes we don't really understand that. So we present something that's secure, but it might not align with everyone else's objectives.
Okay, that makes sense. And thank you so much. This has been a really eye-opening conversation and really informative about, the importance of storytelling and how you evaluate risk and finding the root causes. So thank you so much. I hope everyone joining us today has found this webinar helpful. If you'd like to continue the conversation, then please do connect with us on LinkedIn or visit seconcyber.com and get in touch. Thank you for joining us today. Stay safe and stay secure, and I'll see you hopefully next time at another one of our webinars. Thank you, everyone, and thank you so much, Javvad.
Yeah, thank you.